James Otis Jr., one of the important founding fathers of the United States of America, and also one of the figures that's under discussed, not as well remembered in the historical record as other individuals, whether that be, of course, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, or someone that came reemerged in prominence and popular thought as it relates to American Revolution and the history of America, in terms of Alexander Hamilton with that famous Broadway production that had quite a bit of prominence in the last few years and got his name out there. But James Otis Jr., someone who's at the end of his life apparently burnt a lot of his personal works, which resulted in the only surviving records we have of his thoughts and thinking come from his publications. But these publications had a big impact. He was said to be good friends with Thomas Paine. He had the respect of John Adams, the second president of the United States of America, who was inspired by his works, specifically the 1761 work on writs of assistance and his work of 1765, the Stamp Act, in response to the Stamp Act. And to get into writs of assistance specifically of 1761, it's a criticism of the British policy towards the colonies and the aftermath of the French of Indian War, in efforts to generate revenue to cover for the costly war. There were essentially practices in place which allowed the search of private property without oversight of courts, sufficient oversight of courts, which James Otis argued to be a violation of the rights of British subjects per the tradition of British history, as far as what he asserted to be protected rights. And he cites the Glorious Revolution and Charles II and concessions that the crown had previously given subjects as it related to essentially freedoms, including the idea of a private residence not being scrutinized by officers of the government, agents of the government, without proper oversight of the courts. But as writs of assistance entails, that was not the case in America. Private property was being searched in order to push and enforce laws that the British had set in place to generate revenue. And his work in 1765, the Stamp Act, which he presented on the Stamp Act, which he delivered before the governor and council in Boston on December 20th, 1765, went into details on the aftermath of the institution of the Stamp Act, which, among other acts, were basically ways to generate revenue by the crown, as a lot of debt was run up following the French and Indian War. And Otis points to the Magna Carta and previous statutes and promises, responsibilities that the government had in ensuring rights, but were not being extended to the colonies. Now, Otis Jr. is very much so in the Enlightenment tradition. As other founding fathers, he comes from that Protestant theological framework, coupled with the Enlightenment era thinking and inspiration of the reforms of British government in previous centuries. Now, in juxtaposition to some other founding fathers, such as Thomas Paine or Samuel Adams, James Otis Jr. had more of a reputation of being more grounded, less radical. A matter of fact, his daughter had married a British military officer, and she later moved to England for the remainder of her life. And his wife was a loyalist. I mean, by accounts, it affirms that James Otis himself was a patriot, was ultimately for American independence, but at the same time did not have a hard and firm philosophical framework that he went by in the way that Thomas Paine had. And he sort of adjusted based on the circumstances. He eventually died of a lightning strike in 1783, and his prominence by 1776, when the American Revolution basically went into the phase of direct conflict between the colonists and British forces, he had lost prominence because he had some psychological issues that he was dealing with, and into the 1770s, he no longer was mentally well to continue engage in public life, and as a result, sort of fell from prominence. Now, his works, though, were continuously continuously reprinted and spread amongst the populace, an argument in favor of the American cause. Although it is a shame that, for whatever reason, along with his decline in mental health, he destroyed his personal records, his writings, which as a result, we today do not have a great body of works to review as we would like. Now, there are three main components on writs of assistance, his major work, that I want to cover here real quick before I let you go. And that's violation of natural rights, illegality under common law, and limitation on government power as it related to agents of the crown having unchecked power. And this was in the context of the British government asserting the authority on people's private property without oversight by the courts. And I reemphasize that because fundamentally, as per the natural rights that Enlightenment thinkers valued, Otis pointed this out as being unacceptable to the point where there had to be a stand taken against the crown's position, and he, as a result, had a voice that quite powerfully supported the American cause, albeit not with the same ferocity of a Thomas Paine. And he is certainly not one of the most well-remembered founding fathers, not because of any moral or ethical failings, but as I mentioned, just by the fact that he was a figure that was prominent earlier in the movement in Massachusetts. His health declined. He wasn't able to play a big part in the revolution itself. He wasn't part of the delegations that drafted the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and a lot of his works are destroyed, lost to the historical record. And there you have it, James Otis Jr., someone that perhaps could have had more of a mark on history than he had, but definitely is a player to think about when contemplating the American Revolution. And that is the first individual I am reviewing for the series. Benjamin Franklin is next. But who knows what order you're listening to these videos. Thank you very much for listening. I ask you, please hit the subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment, and till next time, everybody.